Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrael Hawkins. Well, we have STDs on the rise, Turkey buying oil from ISIS, or are they? At least that's what the report is. British jets joining the fight against ISIS. Russian politicians recommending to nuke Turkey.
Wow.
Yeah, And climate change on the agenda again. And France is also closing some mosques, and even Donald Trump's latest solution for dealing with terrorists. Well, those are just a few of the topics on today's broadcast. But first, we start off with the CDC and their report that STDs are on the rise nationally. But that's also taking place in the big country, that is in Abilene, Texas. Linda Rourke from a testing facility in Abilene called Any Lab Test Now encourages people to get testing for themselves, and if they have tested positive, to encourage their family members to come in and be tested as well to keep the diseases from spreading so abundantly.
Data from the CDC has shown that cases of STDs have risen significantly in the U.S. over the past year. Now, reportedly, a big cause of the spread of STDs is that many people don't know they have it. Rourke also said that one person who is very social, as she called it, spreads the disease, and from there it grows astronomically.
Oh, I bet. Now, staying in Abilene, residents are complaining about the smoke that's filling neighborhoods from a local business. One resident, Deborah Moore, described the smoke as thick, billowing, brown, and black, and says that the smoke from a local crematory sometimes engulfs the neighborhood. That's right, that's what they're breathing, crematory smoke. So much so that at times she thinks the neighbor's home is actually on fire.
Wow. Abilene Professional Services offers cremation services. One resident said, "It smells pretty bad. You can almost taste it in your mouth." Residents say they've been experiencing the smoke at least 3 times a week for the last 2 years. Now, according to an environmental report, the company wasn't in violation and no smoke or odor was observed at the time of inspection.
Well, the staff at the TCEQ, that's the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, said that since the business meets permit requirements, there's no immediate health concern. But neighbors say that smoke is still an issue.
Well, Pope Francis visited Turkey, and being only the 4th pope to do so in a predominantly Muslim country, he wasted no time condemning terrorism. The purpose was to strengthen ties with the Muslim world while condemning terrorism. Francis told Turkey's top cleric that an extremist and fundamentalist group had subjected entire communities to barbaric violence simply because of their ethnic and religious identity.
Turkey has been a reluctant partner in the U.S.-led invasion against the Islamic State, and an estimated 1.6 million refugees, Syrian refugees, have fled to Turkey to escape the war and violence there. He also said the world has a moral obligation to help the authorities cope. In an address, Francis also said fanaticism and fundamentalism need to be countered by the solidarity of all believers.
Lastly, Francis told his audience that the use of military force against ISIS is legitimate, but stressed that it should be accompanied by attempts at dialogue.
Doesn't sound like a peaceful solution there. Nope. Well, President Putin has just approved a rash of economic sanctions against Turkey. The list of measures include the visa-free regime with Turkey will be suspended from January, and that's expected to put a huge strain on the million-plus tourists that visit Turkey yearly from Russia. Charter air travel between Turkey and Russia has also been stopped or will be stopped starting in 2016.
Those restrictions come in the wake of tourists being told not to travel to Turkey due to the terror threat. Regular scheduled flights will continue for the moment. Russian tourist companies are no longer selling packages to Turkey. And lastly, some but not all Turkish-made goods will be limited or banned as the Russian parliament decides which products will be exempt. Now, all of this as a response to the downing of a Russian fighter jet by Turkish security forces.
Retired General Wesley Clark spoke to CNBC regarding current conflicts. He said that the U.S. have conflicting geostrategic objectives between Iran on one hand and Saudi Arabia and Turkey on the other hand, and of course, Russia siding with Iran. He said Iran wants to have a land bridge through Iraq, controlling Syria, into Lebanon, and that cuts off Turkey's control and expansion to the southwest. Saudi Arabia, of course, doesn't want to be encircled by Iran, so despite all the enmity in these photos, there are deep underlying conflicts that are taking place, and bombing doesn't get to the half of it.
Well, Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan said concerning alleged proof of them buying oil from ISIS militants, saying if they can prove it, Tayyip Erdogan will not stay here. In other words, he'd step down from office if Russia can prove that he's buying oil from ISIL.
RT has even reached out to Turkish media regarding the accusations of Turkey buying oil, but so far they haven't received a response. That's expected as there has been a crackdown on any media outlet considered hostile to the Turkish government. One such case of this crackdown has led to a high-profile trial case of two journalists who reported Ankara's alleged arms shipment to jihadists.
Turkey's president said himself that the journalists will pay for the report. If convicted, they could face up to 45 years in prison.
Wow. Well, the defense ministry in Russia said recently, "Today we are presenting only some of the facts that confirm that a whole team of bandits and Turkish elites stealing oil from their neighbors is operating in the region, and according to our data, the top political leadership of the country, that being President Erdogan and his family, is involved in this criminal business."
Russia has also reported that their airstrikes have choked off about half of terrorist oil, decreasing the production and sales revenue from 3 million a day to 1.5 million a day 2 months into their airstrikes. Now, Erdogan said in a response that no one has the right to slander his country and that he'll stand down or resign, as he said, if these allegations are proven true.
Russia's defense minister, Anatoly Antonov, said, "Maybe I'm being a little too blunt, but one can only entrust control over this thieving business to one's closest associates. In the West, no one has asked questions about the fact that the Turkish president's son heads one of the biggest energy companies, or that his son-in-law has been appointed energy minister. That's what a marvelous family business," he said, end quote there. Russia says it's the money that's feeding ISIS, and a terrorist without money is like an animal without fangs. So very strong words.
Well, continuing with Russia, President Vladimir Putin spoke at his State of the Nation address about the downing of a Russian jet, saying Ankara will regret the move. Putin said, "We will not forget this. We have always considered treason the worst and most shameful act. And let those in Turkey," he said, "who shot our pilots in the back know that those who try to cover and justify their actions and cover terrorist crimes, we will remind them what they did more than once, and they will regret what they did more than once, and we do know what needs to be done."
Interesting. Wow. But Putin also said that the move by Turkey was considered complicity with the terrorists. While the Kremlin is considering further sanctions to punish Russia, he mentioned again Turkey's involvement in illegal oil trade and said that Russia has evidence to prove that claim. Really
pushing that the Turkey is buying their oil from ISIS.
He sure is, and obviously he has the confidence with the evidence that he has to back him up on that.
Well, Sergei Lavrov said that Moscow and Washington support the need to close Turkish borders with Syria and Iraq as key measures in fighting the Daesh terrorist group. Now, he added that the U.S. is looking into Russian data concerning Turkey's alleged smuggling of oil from ISIL-held territory in Syria and Iraq.
Lavrov and Kerry said they have discussed ways to fight Daesh terrorists. Those remarks came after U.S. State Department spokesman Mark Toner said Washington has found no evidence of Turkey's involvement in smuggling oil across its borders. Russia released satellite images showing tankers crossing the Turkey-Syrian border, and the ministry said that it has proof that Erdogan and his family are benefiting from the illegal smuggling of oil. Of course, Erdogan has denied those allegations, and as we said earlier, again, said he would step down if Russia proved the allegations true.
Well, meanwhile, Britain, Turkey's NATO ally, began bombing in Syria. YPN's Larry McGee is following this story as well as several others. Larry, what's this story about?
British warplanes flew out of Cyprus this week, initiating the quartet members' first airstrikes against ISIS in Syria. The British nation with Roman roots had first limited its assaults on the jihadist sect to Iraq, but it has now combined its efforts with the U.S., France, Canada, Jordan, and Australia, who are currently pounding both countries. Approximately 80% of the strikes, however, are reported to be the work of the United States. Nevertheless, the casualties from those strikes are too meager to please some, according to the perspective recently expressed by Malthusian United Nations executive Christiana Figueres at a Climate One conference. Climate One founder Greg Dalton asked the UN exec if it was true that stopping the rise of population would be one of the biggest levers in driving the rise of greenhouse gases. To which Ms. Figueres replied, "We all know that we expect 9 billion by 2050. So yes, less people would obviously exert less pressures on the natural resources." When that question was followed by whether or not that 9 billion was a foregone conclusion or whether or not it was inevitable or unavoidable, the UN executive commented that there is pressure in the system to go towards that, but we can definitely change those numbers, and we really should make every effort to change those numbers because we are already today exceeding the planetary carrying capacity. One of the top resources mentioned by Club of Rome depopulation is the all-important commodity of oil, which Russia is now accusing Turkey of purchasing from the Islamic State. The U.S. State Department is reported to be downplaying the reports, with the State Department spokesperson Mark Toner stating, in response to the question of whether or not America was aware of ISIS's oil smuggling, that the U.S. has long been aware of ISIS's intent and ability to cash in on the oil has been pumping out. The American position is that ISIS typically sells its oil at the wellhead, where as it comes out of the ground, it is then offloaded to smugglers, middlemen, and truckers, who then take the oil to establish routes, and some of them may no doubt lead to Turkey. In the face of Russian intelligence, which seemed to demonstrate an obvious and deliberate pipeline of sorts between the ancient Mesopotamian nation and ISIS, America is said to be dismissive, stating that the Turks are a NATO ally and a very trusted partner. Outspoken American politician Richard Black is voicing his thoughts on Syria and Turkey, as well as his thoughts on U.S. strategy and its relationship with its Confederates. The Virginia state senator says that Turkey is the most loyal ally that ISIS has. Turkey, he says, has developed a war trade with ISIS that is very important to them, with ISIS's main supply line going through a gap in the Turkish-Syrian border, where the petrogold makes its way into Raqqa and ultimately Mosul in Iraq. The senior statesman has been vocal concerning the fact that in all of the bombing carried out by the U.S. and its allies, they have failed to target any of ISIS's oil tankers, but by contrast, Russia is reported to have incinerated as many as 1,000 of those freights and angered the Turks quite considerably in the process. NATO is now looking to increase security on the border of the Euphrates nation following its recent takedown of a Russian plane it says violated its airspace. The Papal Treaty Organization is looking to load the Turkish nation with more weaponry, with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg saying they will continue to work to ensure Turkish security. The security of the ancient Euphrates nation might indeed be a concern, especially if one takes into account the suggestions and mindset of retaliatory Russian politician and former presidential candidate Vladimir Zhirinovsky, who is advising the current president Vladimir Putin to nuke Turkey for its aggressions. The leader of the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia says the president should launch a nuclear strike against the Turkish city of Istanbul, a move which could kill millions of its residents. The impact of the remaining millions upon the Earth's climate was among the topics at a recent climate conference in Paris. Following the Vatican encyclical on climate change, the attendees were gathered to negotiate an agreement on the state of the climate, how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and in what ways the third world nations could be supported to face climate change. World Bank President Jim Yong Kim was in attendance at the conference and expressed high expectations for the meeting, stating that the gathering was probably the most important meeting ever for climate change, and its participants have to have a lot of ambition coming out of it. The World Bank head went on further to say that a few years ago, they would never have guessed that there would have been 180 specific concrete plans coming from the countries. Out of those 180 INDCs, or intended nationally determined contributions, 130 are reported to be so-called developing nations caught up in the web of World Bank finance. When asked what he would consider a success, Mr. Kim says they need to have great ambition and to say to the world that these 180 plans, not only are we going to take on the task of putting them into action, but in 5 years, we're going to reassess those plans and see if we can be even more ambitious in the next 5 years. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan, Jeff, back to you.
Well, it definitely seems like the route that the nations are currently in is definitely going to lead to that depopulation very, very soon. Well, Russia has never hidden its viewpoints concerning what they want taught to their young people. One such example was made evident preceding the 2014 Winter Olympic Games in Sochi. President Vladimir Putin told gay people visiting Russia's largest resort city to feel welcome. However, they warned them they must leave children in peace.
The president explained further that laws had been introduced the year prior which banned homosexual propaganda from being spread among minors. Now, this means that gay people are forbidden from expressing their views on gay rights to young people. While he said there would be no discrimination of anyone at the Games, protests were tightly controlled and confined to a park in a small town 8 miles away from any Olympic venues. The Chinese had adopted a similar practice during the Beijing Olympics of 2008.
When Pope Francis took his papal office on March 13, 2013, Beijing was quick to issue a warning to the 266th Pope against meddling in China's internal affairs and its religion. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying said in a statement, the Vatican should not interfere in China's internal affairs, including under the pretext of religion. China has an estimated 12 million Roman Catholics and appoints their bishops without papal approval.
Well, speaking of China, if you plan to visit, you might want to bring along a gas mask. China is the world's biggest carbon polluter, and this can be easily seen with a trip to its choking capital. As thick smog blankets Tiananmen Square, the fog-like substance is really a murky, hazardous haze. Now, levels of the most poisonous particulates in Beijing are more than 20 times what the World Health Organization says is safe. Now, on heavily polluted days, the city limits work in factories and on construction sites and encourages people to stay indoors. Don't even go to work, stay indoors.
Wow, that's got to be pretty bad out there. While China has launched a so-called war on pollution, encouraging things like street cleaning. Today it appears to be losing. Well, the source of pollution is thought to be coal, which is where 2/3 of China's energy comes from. Heating systems that are not environmentally friendly, they also make things worse.
One resident who braved the outdoors was asked by CBS News if he was concerned for his 6-year-old son being out in the polluted air. He said, "I hope the government could do more so my kid can live in a better environment, but I know it's not going to be done in a day." Well, the government said the smog is made worse by high humidity and a lack of wind. Now, few citizens heading outdoors wear paper masks because they either believe they don't work or have resigned themselves to live amid the pollution.
Oh, that's sad. Well, the United States has imposed more sanctions on Russia for supporting the Syrian government. The U.S. Treasury Department announced the sanctions were being applied to 4 Russian individuals and 6 business entities, including a bank. A U.S. official say the reasons for further sanctions was these individuals and entities were involved in supporting Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's government. Moscow has denounced the latest round of sanctions, accusing Washington of playing geopolitical games in Syria.
Well, since the Paris attacks, France is taking further measures to protect its country from terrorism. French police have shut down what authorities are calling a suspected radical mosque east of Paris. Now, this took place during a huge security operation. This is the 3rd mosque closed since France declared a state of emergency following the November 13th terror attacks, which left some 130 people dead.
Yeah. Well, the Interior Minister reported 3 cultural centers linked to the mosque were also being dissolved. The closures are part of a huge crackdown in an effort to prevent further similar attacks. Because of these moves, French authorities have been accused of Islamophobia since the acts of terror. Well, many Muslim scholars themselves strongly condemn the killings in Paris, saying Islam does not condone such atrocities.
France also has banned public protests of any kind since the state of emergency was declared at the end of November. However, that didn't stop demonstrators from coming out into the streets of Paris for the International Climate Change Summit. Now, the conference was planned long in advance of the Paris attacks. 147 world leaders, including President Obama, are attending the conference, making it the biggest security challenge yet since the attacks just 2 weeks ago. As you can imagine, everybody's probably still on edge.
Oh, I bet they are. It's puts a lot of people on edge with these things. Riot police have been deployed in unprecedented numbers. There were more than 200 arrests made as some police clashed with climate activists who defied the government's ban on demonstrators. Well, there is also 120,000 strong security force stationed throughout the country, and nearly 1,000 people thought to pose a security risk have been blocked from entering France.
Well, moving on to the news in the West now, the FBI is treating the massacre of 14 people in San Bernardino, California, as an act of terrorism. The Muslim couple attacked a Department of Public Health training event and holiday party where they worked, killing 14 and injuring 20 others with assault rifles. Now, after the shooting, the married couple fled in a rented SUV, only to be found 4 hours later by police who pursued them. The chase ended with the couple being killed in a shootout with law enforcement.
Now, this comes about a week after U.S. officials say that they were not aware of any credible intelligence suggesting a terror attack similar to the one in Paris on U.S. soil. During the conference, FBI Director James Comey urged Americans to remain vigilant. He also said they were watching dozens of people considered to be high risk in the country.
In light of the investigation, presidential candidate Donald Trump is calling for the U.S. to target the families of terrorists. He said, "You have to take out their families. When you get these terrorists, you have to take out their families." He continued adamantly, "They care about their lives. Don't kid yourself, but they say they don't care about their lives. You have to," he said, "take out their families."
Wow, that's amazing. Well, speaking of attacking families, according to reports, a major operation including more than 1,000 Israeli soldiers stormed the Shu'afot camp in the West Bank. Their objective was to demolish the family home of a Palestinian man who killed 3 last year, including 2 police officers and 1 Palestinian. The man hit them with his car and then wounded 14 others with the crowbar before police shot him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Israeli police, clad in riot gear and backed by a helicopter, stormed the refugee camp in East Jerusalem, closing all entrances in the camp and roads inside, preventing ambulances from driving into the area to retrieve wounded Palestinians who had been shot with rubber bullets while the house was being leveled. The police used explosives set in the walls to bring down the man's house, which belonged to his widow and 5 children.
Well, now homeless widow and 5 children. The Israeli troops also clashed with Palestinians in the village of Al-Tor after the soldiers fired tear gas on them. The gas bombs reportedly fell on the hospital as well, poisoning several people, including children.
Well, with all the fighting taking place in the world today and World War III right around the corner, you have little time before these wars actually begin. Now redeem the time remaining by contacting the House of Yahweh today. Your 100% service to Heavenly Father Yahweh is your only protection.
When you contact the House of Yahweh, don't forget to order your free copies of the monthly newsletter and the Prophetic Word magazine. To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites at www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also check out our new website at www.ypnnews.com. And to email the House of Yahweh, send your emails to info@yahweh.com. And for any calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen. And don't forget www.yisraelsays.com for the best free scriptural study tool on the market today.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another inspiring and powerful message from Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.